The wormhole collapsed behind them with a flash of blue light. Captain Jake Morrison gripped the armrests of his chair as the ship shuddered and groaned. Sparks flew from a control panel near the back of the bridge. The smell of burning plastic filled the air. "Report," Jake said, keeping his voice steady even though his heart was racing. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez worked frantically at her station. Her fingers moved across the damaged controls. "We're in one piece, but barely. Navigation is offline. Life support is holding. Weapons are down to 30%. "Where are we?" Jake asked. Amy shook her head. "I don't know, Captain. This isn't any star system in our charts. We're not even close to Earth space anymore." Chief Engineer Danny Parker climbed up from the lower deck, wiping grease from his hands. "That wormhole tore us apart. I can fix most of it, but it's going to take time. Maybe 2 weeks if we're lucky." Jake nodded and looked at the main view screen. Strange stars dotted the darkness. Nothing looked familiar. They were lost, millions of light years from home with a damaged ship and a crew of only 12 people. "Well," Jake said with a slight smile, "at least we made it through alive." Medical Officer Lisa Grant laughed from her station. "Always looking on the bright side, Captain." Before Jake could respond, the ship's alarm blared. Red lights flashed across the bridge. "Contact!" Amy shouted. "Multiple ships coming out of faster-than-light travel. They're surrounding us!" Jake leaned forward. 5 massive ships appeared on the screen. They were dark and angular, covered in what looked like armor plating. Each one was 3 times larger than the horizon's edge. They moved into position with military precision, blocking every escape route. "Try to hail them," Jake ordered. Amy worked her controls, then looked up. "They're responding, Captain. Putting it on screen." The view screen changed. Jake found himself staring at something from a nightmare. The creature was enormous, at least 9 feet tall. Its body was covered in thick, dark scales that looked like natural armor. Sharp claws extended from its hands. Its face was reptilian with rows of teeth visible when it spoke. Yellow eyes stared at Jake with cold intelligence. "I am Commander Vex Thor of the Calreth Dominion," the creature said. Its voice was deep and rough like rocks grinding together. "You have entered our space without permission. This is punishable by death or slavery. Which do you choose?" The bridge went silent. Jake could feel his crew looking at him, waiting for his response. He studied the alien commander for a moment. Vex Thor clearly expected fear. The way the creature held itself, the tone of its voice, everything was designed to intimidate. Jake smiled. "Hello, Commander Vex Thor. I'm Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth vessel Horizon's Edge. We didn't mean to enter your space. We had an accident with a wormhole. We'd appreciate any help you could offer. Maybe we could talk about this?" Vex Thor's eyes narrowed. The alien leaned closer to its screen, studying Jake's face. "You do not fear me?" "Should I?" Jake asked honestly. "You haven't actually threatened us yet. You just gave us options. Not great options, but still." Behind Jake, Amy coughed to cover a laugh. Danny was grinning despite the situation. Even Lisa looked amused. Vex Thor seemed confused. The alien commander turned to something off-screen and spoke in a language that sounded like growls and clicks. When Vex Thor turned back, the confusion had turned to anger. "Your species is either very brave or very stupid," Vex Thor said. "Perhaps both. You will surrender your ship and come aboard my vessel. We will study you before deciding your fate." "And if we refuse?" Jake asked. "Then we will destroy you," Vex Thor replied simply. "Your weapons are weak. Your ship is damaged. You cannot escape. You cannot fight. Surrender is your only option." Jake looked at Amy, who shook her head slightly. She was right. They had no real choice. Fighting would get them killed. Running was impossible with their damaged engines. "All right," Jake said. "We'll surrender, but I want your word that my crew won't be harmed." Vexthor showed its teeth in what might have been a smile. "You are in no position to demand anything, human. But yes, you will not be harmed. Yet." The screen went dark. Jake sat back in his chair and let out a long breath. His hands were shaking slightly. He'd been terrified the entire time, but he couldn't let Vexthor see that. Couldn't let his crew see that. "Captain," Lisa said quietly, "what do we do now?" Jake stood up and straightened his uniform. "We do what humans have always done when things look impossible. We survive, we adapt, and we find a way out of this mess." Within an hour, Calreth soldiers boarded the horizon's edge. They were all massive, armed with weapons that hummed with energy. The leader, a female Calreth with scars across her face, gestured for the humans to follow. As they walked through the corridors toward the docking port, Danny leaned close to Jake. "Sir, they keep staring at us, like they can't figure something out." Jake had noticed it too. The Calreth soldiers looked confused, almost disturbed. They kept their weapons ready but seemed unsure how to handle prisoners who weren't cowering in fear. They were taken aboard the Calreth flagship and brought to a holding cell. The room was large, clearly designed for much bigger prisoners. Everything was oversized and built from dark metal. As the door sealed behind them, Amy spoke up. "Well, this is bad." "Could be worse," Danny said. "How?" Lisa asked. Danny grinned. "We could be dead." Jake walked to the small window in the cell. Outside, he could see the Calreth ships moving through space. They were heading somewhere, taking the humans to an unknown destination. He thought about Earth, so far away now. He thought about his crew, depending on him to get them home. He thought about the confusion in Vexthor's eyes when Jake had smiled instead of trembling in fear. Maybe that confusion was something they could use. Maybe the Calreth's greatest weapon, their ability to terrify other species, wouldn't work on humans the way they expected. Jake turned back to his crew. They were scared. He could see it in their faces, but they weren't broken. They were already looking around the cell, studying it, planning. "Get some rest," Jake told them. "Tomorrow we figure out where we are and how to get home." As they settled in for an uncomfortable night, none of them knew they were being taken to a prison world where the Calreth kept their most dangerous specimens. None of them knew they were about to teach the galaxy a lesson it would never forget. All they knew was that they were afraid, but they weren't giving up, and that simple fact would change everything. The prison world of Krathnor hung in space like a dead thing. Its surface was gray and barren, covered in massive structures that rose from the ground like metal mountains. This was where the Calreth Dominion kept specimens from every species they had conquered. Jake and his crew were brought down in a transport ship. Through the windows, they could see other ships arriving and leaving. The prison was enormous, stretching for miles in every direction. "This place is huge," Amy whispered, as they were led through corridors filled with guards. The walls were thick and lined with energy barriers. Every few feet, automated weapons tracked their movement. The Calreth weren't taking any chances with their prisoners. They stopped at a massive door that opened into a large cell. Inside, the walls were transparent on one side, looking out into a central yard where hundreds of different aliens moved around. Jake saw creatures of every size and shape. Some walked on 2 legs, some on 4. Some flew, some crawled. All of them looked defeated. "Your new home," the guard said in broken English. He pushed them inside and the door sealed shut behind them. Danny immediately went to examine the door controls. Lisa looked out at the yard, watching the other prisoners. Amy studied the ceiling, noting the security cameras and sensors. Jake walked to the transparent wall and watched the aliens below. They moved slowly without purpose. Their eyes were empty. Whatever fight they once had was gone. "They broke them," Jake said quietly. "They'll try to break us too," Lisa replied. Over the next few days, they learned how the prison worked. The Calreth guards would take prisoners at random for what they called fear studies. They would expose the prisoners to different types of danger and watch how they reacted. It was all designed to measure and study fear responses. When Jake's turn came, he was brought to a white room with a Calreth scientist named Krathzel. The alien was older than the guards, with more scars and a calculating look in its eyes. "You are the captain," Krathzel said, walking around Jake slowly. "The one who smiled at Commander Vexthor. This interests me greatly." "Happy to entertain," Jake said, trying to keep his voice light even though his heart was pounding. Krathzel pressed a button. The floor beneath Jake became transparent. Below, he could see a pit filled with creatures that looked like massive snakes with too many teeth. They writhed and snapped at each other, clearly starving. "Most species freeze when confronted with predators," Krathzel explained. "Their fear response locks them in place. This makes them easy to control. But you humans, you are different." Jake looked down at the creatures, feeling his stomach twist with fear. But he forced himself to breathe slowly, to think clearly. "Different how?" "Your fear does not control you," Krathzel said, sounding frustrated. "It should, but it does not." "Why?" Jake looked up at the Calreth scientist. "Because fear is just information. It tells me there's danger. What I do with that information is up to me." Krathzel's eyes narrowed. "Impossible. Fear is a survival mechanism. It is meant to stop you from taking risks." "No," Jake said. "Fear is meant to prepare us for risks. There's a difference." The scientist ran more tests. He showed Jake images designed to trigger panic. He played sounds that should have caused psychological distress. He even used some kind of device that directly stimulated fear responses in the brain. Every time, Jake felt the fear. His hands shook. His breathing quickened. Sweat ran down his face. But he didn't freeze. He didn't beg. He processed the fear and kept thinking. When Jake was finally returned to his cell, he found his crew had been through similar tests. They all looked shaken, but unbroken. "This is what they do," Lisa said. She was treating a cut on Danny's arm. "They try to break prisoners psychologically. They want us too scared to fight back." "It's working on everyone else," Amy said, looking out at the yard. "Look at them. They're terrified all the time." Jake nodded slowly. An idea was forming in his mind. What if we could teach them what we know? That fear doesn't have to mean defeat. Over the following weeks, Jake and his crew began reaching out to other prisoners. It started small. Danny shared his food with an insect-like alien named Clicktar, who had been starved as punishment. Lisa treated injuries of prisoners the guards ignored. Amy taught some of the younger aliens how to stay calm during the fear tests. Clicktar was the first to really listen. The insect alien had been in the prison for 3 years. His species had been conquered by the Calreth decades ago. "Your people," Clicktar said to Danny one day in the yard. "You are not afraid of the Calreth?" "We're terrified of them," Danny admitted, "but being afraid doesn't mean we stop trying." "I do not understand," Clicktar said, his translator device struggling with the concept. Danny thought for a moment. "My people have a saying. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite the fear." The concept spread slowly through the prison. Prisoners who hadn't spoken to each other in years began talking. Species that had been enemies started cooperating. The humans shared stories from Earth's history about people who faced impossible odds and fought anyway. Jake told them about the soldiers who held positions against overwhelming forces. Lisa shared stories of doctors who treated diseases everyone said were incurable. Amy talked about explorers who sailed into unknown oceans despite their fear of what might be out there. The prisoners began to change. They started standing straighter, looking the guards in the eye. small acts of defiance that the Calreth noticed but didn't understand. Krathzel was particularly disturbed. He increased the testing on the humans, trying to find their breaking point. He exposed them to predators, created simulated scenarios where they faced certain death, used psychological torture techniques that had broken every other species. Nothing worked. The humans were afraid, visibly terrified at times, but they kept adapting, kept thinking, kept planning. "You are a virus," Krathzel told Jake during one session. "You infect the other prisoners with your defiance. This cannot continue." "What are you going to do?" Jake asked. "Kill us? We're not doing anything against your rules. We're just talking to people." Krathzel's claws extended. "Perhaps killing one of you will remind the others of their place." Jake's blood went cold. He tried to keep his expression neutral, but Krathzel saw the fear flash across his face. The alien scientist seemed satisfied. That evening, guards came to their cell. They took Lisa. Jake tried to stop them, but a guard hit him with an energy weapon that sent him sprawling. Danny and Amy tried to rush forward, but were held back by other guards. "No!" Jake shouted as they dragged Lisa away. "Take me instead!" "I'm the captain." But the guards were already gone. Lisa's last look at them was one of fear, but also determination. She wasn't going quietly. Jake sat on the floor of the cell, his whole body shaking. Not from the energy weapon, from rage. "They're going to kill her," Amy said quietly. Tears ran down her face. Danny's hands were clenched into fists. "We can't let them." Jake looked up at his crew. Then he looked out at the yard where dozens of aliens were watching their cell. He saw Kliktar and the others they had befriended. He saw the change they had started. "We're not going to let them," Jake said, standing up. "We've been planning our escape carefully, taking our time, making sure everyone could get out safely." He walked to the transparent wall and looked at the assembled prisoners. "But now we're out of time." "What are you saying?" Amy asked. Jake turned to face them. His fear was gone, burned away by something hotter and more dangerous. "I'm saying it's time to show these aliens what humans are really capable of when they're not just afraid," Jake said. "When they're angry." The execution was scheduled for dawn. The entire prison population would be forced to watch as Lisa was killed in the central yard. Krathzel wanted to send a message. He wanted to remind everyone that fear should lead to obedience, but he made a critical mistake. He gave the humans time to plan. Jake stood at the transparent wall of their cell, looking out at the dark yard below. It was 3 hours before dawn. Danny worked behind him, carefully prying open an access panel near the door. "Got it," Danny whispered. His hands moved quickly through the wiring beneath. "These circuits control the energy barriers on our cell. If I can overload them at just the right moment, it'll create a surge through the whole section." "How big a surge?" Amy asked. She was watching the security cameras, tracking the guard patrol patterns they had memorized over weeks. "Big enough to cause a blackout," Danny said with a grim smile. "Maybe 2 minutes of darkness before the backup systems kick in. That's our window." Jake turned to face them. 2 minutes isn't much time." "It's enough," Amy said. "The guards don't expect resistance. They're used to prisoners who are too afraid to fight back. That gives us an advantage." Through the cell wall, they could see other prisoners gathering. Kliktar and dozens of others were positioned at key points throughout the yard. The humans had spent weeks building a network, teaching other species that fear could be overcome. Now, it was time to prove it. Jake checked the small weapon he had built from parts Danny had stolen during maintenance work. It wasn't much, just a crude energy disruptor, but it would work. Amy had a sharpened piece of metal she had been hiding. Danny had created several small explosive devices from prison chemicals. "Everyone knows the plan?" Jake asked. They nodded. Amy would lead the assault on the armory. Danny would get to the power core and keep the blackout going as long as possible. Jake would find Lisa. Guard change in 5 minutes, Amy said, watching the patterns. That's our moment. The minutes crawled by. Jake's heart hammered in his chest. He was terrified. Terrified they would fail. Terrified Lisa was already dead. Terrified his crew would die because of his decisions. But the fear didn't stop him. It sharpened him, made him focus. Now, Amy said. Danny pressed the final wire into place. The energy barrier around their cell flickered, then surged. Sparks flew from the control panel. An alarm started to sound, then cut off as the power failed. Darkness swallowed the prison. Jake kicked the weakened door. It bent under the impact. Another kick and it flew open. They rushed out into the corridor. Emergency lights flickered on, casting everything in red. Guards shouted in confusion. They were used to their fear tactics working, used to prisoners who stayed in their cells even when the doors were open. They weren't ready for prisoners who ran toward danger instead of away from it. Amy led them through corridors they had memorized. Other prisoners were breaking out of their cells, joining the uprising. Kliktar and his people swarmed a group of guards, overwhelming them with numbers. "Left here!" Amy shouted. They turned a corner and ran straight into 3 Calreth guards. The aliens raised their weapons, confident that the small humans would freeze in fear at the sight of them. Jake didn't freeze. He raised his makeshift disruptor and fired. The blast caught the first guard in the chest, sending the massive alien sprawling. Amy was already moving, sliding under the second guard's shot and driving her sharpened metal into its leg. Danny threw one of his explosives, which detonated against the third guard's armor with a blinding flash. The guards fell, unconscious or stunned. The humans kept running. They reached the armory within the 2-minute window. Amy made quick work of the lock, and suddenly they had real weapons. Energy rifles that were almost too big for human hands but would work. "Danny, go," Jake ordered. "Keep the power flickering. Make them work in the dark." Danny nodded and ran toward the power core. Jake and Amy headed for the execution chamber. The backup lights came on, then went out again as Danny reached the power systems. The prison descended into chaos. Prisoners and guards fought in the darkness. The Calreth were bigger and stronger, but the prisoners had numbers and something else. They had hope. Jake burst into the execution chamber. Lisa was there, chained to a post in the center. Krath-Zel stood nearby, looking confused and angry at the chaos. "How is this possible?" the scientist demanded. "You should be cowering in your cells." Jake aimed his rifle at Krath-Zel. "You wanted to study fear. Let me teach you something about it. Fear isn't a cage. For humans, it's fuel." Krath-Zel's eyes went wide. For the first time, the Calreth scientist felt what his prisoners had felt. He was afraid. Jake kept his weapon trained on Krath-Zel while Amy freed Lisa. The medical officer was bruised but alive. "You came," Lisa said, her voice shaking with relief. "Always," Jake replied. More guards burst into the room. Jake, Amy, and Lisa took cover behind the execution post, firing back. They were outnumbered but not outfought. The guards expected them to panic, to make mistakes. Instead, the humans worked together with practiced efficiency. Kliktar and a dozen other prisoners arrived, flanking the guards. The Calreth found themselves surrounded, caught between human determination and alien anger. The battle lasted less than 5 minutes. When it was over, the guards were unconscious or fleeing. Krath-Zel cowered in the corner, his confidence shattered. Jake walked over to the scientist. "You studied fear for years. You used it as a weapon, but you never understood it. Fear only works if people give up, and humans never learned how to quit." Throughout the prison, similar scenes played out. Guards who had terrorized prisoners for years found themselves hunted through dark corridors. The Calreth had built their power on fear, but they had never experienced what it was like to be truly afraid. Danny managed to keep the power systems unstable for over an hour. By the time the Calreth regained control of the prison systems, thousands of prisoners had escaped. They took ships from the landing bays, scattering in every direction. Jake and his crew, along with Lisa and dozens of other prisoners, commandeered a fast courier ship. It was Calreth design, sleek and powerful. As they lifted off from Crathnor, Amy piloted them away from the prison world. Behind them, the massive structure was still in chaos. Emergency lights flickered across its surface like dying stars. "Where do we go?" Lisa asked. She was in the medical bay, treating her injuries and those of the other escapees. Jake looked at the star charts. Earth was impossibly far away, but at least now they knew which direction to go. "We head home, and we warn Earth that they're not alone in the universe anymore." "The Calreth will come after us," Amy said from the pilot's seat. "They can't let this insult stand." "I know," Jake said. He looked at the faces of his crew. They were exhausted, injured, and scared. But they were also fierce and determined. They had survived a Calreth prison. They had taught an entire prison full of broken aliens how to fight back. Kliktar approached Jake. The insect alien's translator crackled as he spoke. "My people are spreading across the galaxy. We will tell everyone what we learned here. The Calreth's power was based on fear, but you showed us fear can be overcome." "What will you do?" Jake asked. "We will remember," Kliktar said, "and we will resist. Some will fight, some will hide. But none of us will forget that the Calreth are not invincible." As the ship jumped to faster-than-light travel, Jake thought about what was coming. The Calreth wouldn't forgive this. They would hunt the humans. They might even attack Earth. But Earth needed to know. Humanity needed to prepare. Because ready or not, they were now part of a larger galaxy. A galaxy ruled by fear and force. And humans were about to teach that galaxy a very important lesson. Fear wasn't the Calreth's weapon. It was humanity's. They had been afraid since they first learned to think. Afraid of the dark, afraid of predators, afraid of death itself. But they had survived and thrived because they learned to act despite their fear. And now that same trait would either save them or doom them against an empire that had conquered 47 worlds. Jake watched the stars streak past as they raced toward Earth. They had maybe a month before the Calreth would demand answers, maybe 2 before they would send their fleet. It wasn't much time, but it would have to be enough. Earth received the message 3 weeks after the prison break on Crathnor. The transmission came from escaped prisoners scattered across the galaxy, dozens of species speaking dozens of languages, all telling the same story. Humans had started a rebellion, and the Calreth Dominion was coming. Admiral Pete Jackson stood in the command center of Earth's defense headquarters, watching the messages play on the screens around him. He was an old soldier, gray-haired and tired, but his eyes were sharp. He had fought in 3 wars on Earth. Now he was facing something much worse. "How long do we have?" he asked Dr. Helen Foster, who stood beside him studying the alien data. "The escaped prisoners say the Calreth mobilized slowly," Helen replied. She was young for a doctor, but brilliant. Her team had been studying the sensor data from the horizon's edge for weeks, trying to understand Calreth technology. "Their empire is huge, spread across hundreds of systems. It takes time to gather their forces, maybe 6 weeks, maybe 8. "And how many ships will they send?" Helen's face went pale. "The prisoners estimate 500 warships, maybe more." Pete looked at the defense grid displayed on the main screen. Earth had 70 ships that could be called warships. Most were converted mining vessels and patrol boats. Only 15 were actual military designs, and those were meant for fighting other humans, not alien monsters. "We can't win this," someone said behind them. Pete turned to see Chris Anderson, one of Earth's best pilots. The young man looked scared but determined. "Maybe not," Pete agreed, "but we can make them pay for every inch of space they take." Over the next month, Earth prepared for war. It wasn't a glorious preparation. There were no parades or celebrations, just fear and frantic work. Dr. Helen Foster's team worked around the clock studying the Calreth weapons data from the escaped prisoners. They learned that Calreth shields were strong but designed to stop large, powerful attacks. They struggled against multiple small strikes. "We can use that," Helen told Pete during a briefing. "Their tactics are based on intimidation, big ships, big weapons. They expect enemies to see their fleet and surrender." "And when we don't?" Pete asked. "Then we hit them with tactics they've never seen before. Fast, small, unpredictable." Chris Anderson and his pilots trained in new fighters designed by Helen's team. The ships were tiny compared to Calreth warships, fast and agile. They couldn't take much damage, but they didn't need to. They just needed to strike and escape. Combat specialist Nina Brooks trained ground forces for what everyone hoped wouldn't happen: planetary defense. If the Calreth broke through in space, Earth itself would become a battlefield. "We're teaching civilians how to fight," Nina told Pete one evening. She looked exhausted. "Kids, teachers, people who've never held a weapon, this is insane." "This is survival," Pete replied quietly. "The Calreth will show no mercy. You know that." Nina nodded. She had read the reports from the prison world. She knew what the Calreth did to species they conquered. Better to die fighting than live as specimens in a cage. The Horizon's Edge arrived 2 weeks before the Calreth fleet. Jake Morrison and his crew were exhausted, having pushed their stolen ship to its limits. But they brought valuable intelligence and something more important. They brought hope. Pete met them at the landing bay. He studied Jake carefully. The young captain looked different, harder. There was a darkness in his eyes that came from seeing things no one should have to see. "Welcome home, Captain," Pete said, offering his hand. Jake shook it. "Thank you, sir. I'm sorry we brought trouble with us." "You didn't bring anything," Pete said. "This was always coming." "The Calreth have been expanding for thousands of years. Eventually they would have found us. At least now we have warning." Jake introduced his crew. Pete was impressed by them. They were young and scared, but they had survived a Calreth prison and led a rebellion. That took something special. "Tell me about them," Pete said. "The Calreth. How do they fight?" Jake thought for a moment. "They use fear as their primary weapon. They're used to enemies who see their fleet and give up. But, sir, they've never faced an enemy who fights back despite being terrified." "And that's us?" "That's us," Jake confirmed. "Humans have been afraid our whole history. We just learned to push through it. The Calreth don't understand that." The Calreth fleet arrived exactly 6 weeks after the prison break. 500 massive warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system. They were enormous, each one bristling with weapons. The fleet moved in perfect formation, a demonstration of power designed to make any enemy surrender immediately. Commander Vexathor, who had captured the Horizon's Edge months ago, led the fleet. He opened communications with Earth, expecting to see terror on human faces. Instead, Admiral Pete Jackson appeared on the screen, calm and ready. "I am Commander Vexathor of the Calreth Dominion," the alien said. "You harbor criminals who destroyed our prison facility. Surrender them and your world will be spared. Refuse and we will take them by force." Pete looked at the massive alien without flinching. "This is Admiral Pete Jackson of Earth Defense. Those people are our citizens, and we don't surrender our own. If you want them, you'll have to come get them." Vexthor's eyes narrowed. "You have 70 ships. We have 500. Your resistance is meaningless." "Maybe," Pete said. "But humans have a saying. It's not the size of the dog in the fight. It's the size of the fight in the dog. Come try us, Commander. See what happens." The transmission ended. Vexthor stared at the blank screen in confusion. The human leader had shown no fear, no hesitation. This was wrong. This wasn't how species were supposed to react to the Dominion's power. They're bluffing, Vexthor's second officer said. They must be. Advance the fleet, Vexthor ordered. We will crush them quickly and move on. But as the Calreth fleet moved deeper into the solar system, strange things started happening. Asteroids they were passing suddenly exploded, not with enough force to damage the ships but enough to disrupt their sensors. Hidden satellites fired small missiles that didn't target the big ships, but instead went after communication arrays and sensor pods. Chris Anderson led his fighter squadron in hit-and-run attacks. They would appear out of the asteroid belt, fire on a Calreth ship's shield generators, then disappear before the massive alien weapons could track them. It was like fighting ghosts. The Calreth expected a big battle, ship to ship, where their superior numbers and firepower would win quickly. Instead, they faced an enemy that refused to engage directly. Days passed. The Calreth fleet slowly pushed toward Earth, but every mile cost them. Not in ships destroyed, but in nerves frayed and confusion mounting. Their sensors were compromised. Their communications were jammed. Small human fighters attacked without warning, then vanished. Vexthor had never experienced anything like it. War was supposed to be predictable. You showed your strength, and the enemy either fought honorably or surrendered. Humans did neither. They hid and struck from the shadows. They used weapons the Calreth considered beneath warriors. They fought dirty. These humans have no honor, Vexthor said to his officers. One of them, a younger Calreth named Drekkor, responded quietly. But they have effectiveness. We've lost 40 ships to engine failures and collisions. Our fleet is blind and confused. Perhaps we should reconsider. Reconsider, Vexthor roared. We are the Calreth Dominion. We have conquered 47 worlds. These humans cannot defeat us. But as the days turned into weeks, doubt crept into the Dominion fleet. The humans were terrified. Intercepted communications made that clear. They knew they were outmatched. They knew they might lose. But they kept fighting. And that was something the Calreth had never encountered before. An enemy that understood they were probably going to die, but refused to stop trying anyway. It changed the nature of the conflict. Made it unpredictable. Made it scary in a way the Calreth weren't used to feeling. 3 months into the siege, both sides were exhausted. The Calreth fleet had lost over 100 ships, not to direct combat, but to accidents, sabotage, and the slow grinding wear of fighting an enemy that refused to face them openly. Earth's forces had lost 30 vessels and thousands of lives, but they hadn't surrendered. Commander Vexthor sat in his command chamber, staring at tactical displays that made no sense. His fleet should have taken Earth in days. Instead, they were stuck in a war of attrition they weren't prepared for. His second officer, Drekkor, entered quietly. Commander, our supply lines are stretched thin. The troops are showing signs of stress. Some are requesting reassignment. Requesting? Vexthor's voice was dangerous. Calreth warriors do not request to leave battle. They're afraid, sir, Drekkor said carefully. The humans use tactics we've never faced. They strike without warning. They hide in the dark. They make our soldiers feel hunted. Vexthor slammed his fist on the console. We are the hunters. We have always been the hunters. Not here, Drekkor replied. Here. We're the prey. On Earth, Admiral Pete Jackson reviewed the latest reports with a heavy heart. They had held longer than anyone expected, but they couldn't hold forever. The Calreth were adapting to human tactics. Soon they would break through. We need a new approach, Dr. Helen Foster said during an emergency meeting. Something they won't expect. Jake Morrison, who had been working with Pete's staff, spoke up. We need to hit them where they live. Show them that this war isn't just about Earth anymore. What do you mean? Pete asked. The escaped prisoners gave us coordinates for Calreth space, Jake explained. Their homeworld, their major colonies. What if we took a small team deep into their territory? Not to conquer, but to deliver a message. "That's suicide," Chris Anderson said, but his eyes were thoughtful. "We'd never make it back." "Maybe not," Jake agreed, "but we could make them understand that continuing this war will cost them everything. That humans aren't just defending Earth. We're willing to take the fight to them." Pete studied Jake carefully. "You're volunteering for this mission?" "It was my crew that started this," Jake said. "Seems right that we're the ones who finish it." The plan was approved. Jake, Amy, Danny, and Lisa would take the fastest ship Earth had, loaded with data and messages from the escaped prisoners. They would jump deep into Calreth space, broadcast a galaxy-wide message, and hope it changed something before they were killed. Chris Anderson insisted on joining them. So did 3 other pilots. It became a team of 8 humans on a mission that was probably going to get them all killed. They left Earth under cover of a major offensive. Admiral Pete Jackson threw everything he had at the Calreth fleet, giving Jake's ship the opening it needed to slip away. The journey took 2 weeks. They traveled through empty space, avoiding Calreth patrols, using every trick they had learned. When they finally reached the Calreth homeworld, it was nighttime on the capital city. "This is it," Amy said from the pilot's seat. "Once we start broadcasting, they'll scramble every ship in the system. We'll have maybe 10 minutes. Jake nodded. He had prepared the message carefully. It included footage from the prison break, showing dozens of species standing together against their oppressors. It showed the battles at Earth, where human pilots rammed their damaged ships into Calreth cruisers rather than surrender. It showed Dr. Helen Foster and her team working through their terror to create new weapons. It showed everything that made humans different. "Send it," Jake ordered. The broadcast went out on every frequency. Within seconds, every screen across the Calreth homeworld showed the same message. Jake's face, tired but determined, speaking directly to the Calreth people. "I'm Captain Jake Morrison of Earth," he said. "You don't know us. We're a small species from a small world. When your commander Vexithor found us, we were lost and alone. He could have helped us. Instead, he imprisoned us. He tried to break us with fear." The footage played showing the prison, the tests, the attempted execution of Lisa. "You use fear as a weapon," Jake continued. "You've built your empire on it. And yes, we're afraid of you. We're terrified. Your ships are bigger. Your weapons are stronger. You've conquered 47 species. We're just one small world." The broadcast showed human civilians learning to fight, children saying goodbye to parents who might not return, cities preparing for invasion. "But here's what you need to understand," Jake said, and his voice became hard as steel. "We're afraid, but we're fighting anyway. And that makes us more dangerous than any species you've ever conquered. Because fear doesn't stop us. It drives us. It makes us creative. It makes us desperate. It makes us willing to do anything to survive." The footage shifted to show the damage inflicted on the Calreth fleet. 100 ships lost or damaged. Supply lines disrupted. Soldiers requesting reassignment because they were afraid. "You wanted to teach us fear," Jake said, "but you forgot something important. Humans have been afraid since we first learned to think. We've been afraid of predators and darkness and death itself. And we survived by turning that fear into action, into innovation, into stubbornness that borders on insanity." The broadcast showed Clicktar and other escaped prisoners spreading across the galaxy. It showed species that had accepted Calreth rule for generations starting to question it. "This message is going to everyone in your empire," Jake said. "Every species you've conquered, and they're going to see what we've shown them. That fear only works if you give up, that your power isn't absolute, that resistance is possible." Jake leaned closer to the camera. "So here's my message to your Dominion. You can continue this war. You might even win it, but it will cost you everything, because we'll never stop fighting. Never stop resisting," And every species watching this broadcast will remember that the mighty Calreth Dominion was fought to a standstill by one small world that refused to accept defeat. We're not asking you to surrender. We're telling you that the choice is yours. Continue fighting a species too stubborn to know when they're beaten, or find a new way forward, because the galaxy has changed, and it's not going back to the way it was. The broadcast ended. Alarms blared across the Calreth homeworld as their military mobilized. Jake's ship was already moving, trying to escape the system. They didn't make it far. Calreth fighters surrounded them within minutes. Jake prepared to fight, to go down swinging like humans always did. But the fighters didn't fire. They escorted Jake's ship to a landing bay on a space station, where Commander Vexthor was waiting. The Calreth commander looked different, older somehow, tired. He studied Jake in silence for a long moment. "Your broadcast reached every world in our empire," Vexthor said finally. "The Dominion Council is in emergency session. There are riots on 3 conquered worlds. Our soldiers are refusing to deploy." "Good," Jake said. "This is not good," Vexthor replied. "You have broken something that took 3,000 years to build." "You broke it yourselves," Jake shot back. "You built your empire on fear, but you never asked what happens when people stop being afraid, or start being more afraid of living under your rule than dying to resist it." Vexthor's claws extended, then retracted. The gesture seemed almost helpless. "The Council wishes to negotiate a ceasefire. Not because you defeated us in battle, but because continuing this war might destroy the Dominion from within." Jake felt relief wash over him, followed immediately by exhaustion. "I need to speak with Admiral Jackson on Earth." The negotiations took 3 days. In the end, the Calreth Dominion agreed to withdraw from Earth's system and recognize human sovereignty. More importantly, they agreed to allow representatives from conquered species to address the Dominion Council about their treatment. It wasn't freedom for those species, not yet, but it was the beginning of change. Jake and his crew returned to Earth as heroes, but they didn't feel like heroes. They felt tired. They had survived something that should have killed them, but at tremendous cost. Earth had lost thousands of lives. The scars would last for generations. Admiral Pete Jackson met them at the landing bay. "The Calreth fleet is withdrawing. It's over." "For now," Jake said. He looked up at the stars. "They'll be back someday. Maybe not to conquer, but they'll remember us." "Good," Pete said. "Let them remember. Let the whole galaxy remember that humans don't surrender, that we turn fear into fuel, that we're too stubborn to know when we're beaten." Lisa Grant summed it up best weeks later, during a memorial service for those who had died in the defense of Earth. The Calreth thought fear was their weapon. They used it to control 47 species for thousands of years. But they made one critical mistake. They assumed that fear would make us weak. They never considered that fear could make us stronger. That our ancestors survived specifically because they learned to act despite their terror. That fear for humans isn't a cage. It's a challenge. She paused, looking at the memorial wall covered in names. "The Calreth taught us fear. We taught them what humans do with it, and the galaxy will never be the same." In the years that followed, Earth joined the galactic community carefully, always wary of the Calreth Dominion, but no longer afraid of them. The escaped prisoners from Crathnor spread human philosophy across the stars. The idea that fear didn't have to mean submission, that defiance was possible. The Calreth Dominion still existed, still powerful, but changed. They learned to negotiate instead of just conquering. They learned that their greatest weapon had limits. And across the galaxy, species that had lived in fear for generations looked at the small blue world called Earth and whispered the same thing. Humans are here now. And humans don't know how to quit. It was perhaps the most terrifying thing any of them had ever learned, and also the most hopeful.